Good evening, everyone. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to the Dog Tag Diva podcast. I'm your host, Diva, and I am very excited and happy to have a very special guest with me tonight, Lieutenant Commander retired. I'm so jealous, Kathryn Wilgus. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back on. I know it's been a minute, but yeah, so I'm excited to be here with you, with a woman, and discussing our veterans, obviously. I think that's important. So kudos to you for having the podcast.
No, I'm happy to have you back on. We had some technical issues in the first season with your episode, and I think we've both kind of worked through some of the technical stuff. And I'm happy to have you on to discuss your time in service and the important work that you're doing now that you're out of the service. So, why don't you go ahead and tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am first an Army OR tech, operating room tech. I joined in 1987, delayed entry, and I served with a combat support hospital, didn't go anywhere, and left out of there in 96, I think, 1996. Did 9 years. Was finishing nursing. I was in my junior year. I was doing that on the side. And so when I graduated, I just went to work. I stayed out. I have a twin. My twin sister was in at the time. When I left, she was going in, if you will, I guess. And then my whole gap, she was still in, and she was in Iraq at the time. I joined the Navy as a nurse. So I did 11 years as a Navy nurse. So I like to say I'm a Mustang because it's just two different worlds. It's not all Navy, but enlisted and worked my way up. And so was my twin. So I still worked in the operating room. So I've only known operating room my whole military time, either from the table side or from the outside.
Wow. So you obviously like the OR because you stayed in it. Did you ever try anything else in nursing, or that was your comfort zone and that's where you stayed?
In my 7 years that I was civilian working, because I joined the Navy as an OR nurse. But my 7 years, I did some prison psychology. Yeah, that was crazy. Yeah, that was crazy. Don't recommend that for a lot of people. I I did hospice, and people thought, it was going to burn me out quick. And it was hard, but it was very gratifying, just totally different, But eventually I went back to operating room because it wasn't, I'm not going to say challenging, but I just felt it was a better niche for me. But I did want to go out and try a couple of other specialties. So, initially I wanted to be a nurse practitioner or be a CRNA. But when I came out and I went directly to the operating room, I missed the floor nursing. Yay! But that was actually detrimental, because once you're in for 5-6 years, when I applied for other positions, they're like, oh, you need a year of floor nursing.
Yeah.
Inside nursing. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going back there.
Yeah, no, thanks.
Okay. So I just sort of settled into my niche because I was not going down. So
you know what? It worked for you. Nursing, that's the great thing about nursing, right? Is there's so many things to do. As I sit here, I'm coming up on my 28th year of nursing, and the bulk of my career is adult and pediatric critical care. And I have 6 to 8 years left in the service, depending on if I make captain or not. So, we'll see. But I'm looking forward to the day that I can retire and I can completely walk away from the bedside. And I feel that hospice is kind of calling me. I've had, not only my critical care experience, I've had some experience just personally and professionally with death and dying and in the home care environment.
Yeah.
And I think that, once that critical care is no longer required and expected of me in the military, that I do think that that's kind of where my path is going. So we'll see, but it's interesting to hear that you that you liked it, that piece of that part of your life.
Yeah, like you said, there's something about nurses who are angry and hate where they're at because they're out there.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They don't leave. because it's a shame, because there are so many different specialties. You may not have to go down to floor nursing, but there's still so many other specialties that you can take on. And so many hospitals still need, nurses, and that they're willing to train depending on what it is. So, I try my whole time I was in, I would meet people who would say one of their nurses obviously was their bedside manner was not the best, and it was very disheartening, because when you lose that compassion, period, you need a change.
Right.
So
how long were you, what's your total time in nursing, military plus civilian?
Good question. So
too long.
I graduated from nursing school in 97.
Oh, the year before me. Okay.
97, 87. Yeah, 97. So it was late that year. So I got it in 98, and I started in Louisiana first. So, and then technically this year in the state of Florida, I have put in for retirement with my
Oh my license. God, I'm so jealous.
I usually, I looked at it, and I've been holding it, obviously making my quota, whatever. Because I too have my master's, and I have a postgraduate certificate in education that I always wanted to teach.
Right.
But my life has gone in so many different directions, and good. And I just thought, who am I kidding? I'm not gonna go do that. So I'm still young. I mean, technically I'm 55, so that's not old.
Well, and here's my frustration is, the state of Florida, the board pass rates are terrible. Yeah. And, we need more nurses. There's this national shortage, and I'm going to retire and there's still going to be a shortage, but we don't have enough qualified instructors. Well, you're not going to get qualified instructors if you don't pay them well. Like, it's not rocket science.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't even think it was the pay. It was the, when I completed my master's, I was actually in Afghanistan. And so I disagree with some of nursing's criteria. Like, we had, and I still disagree with it, I had green nurses who went from bachelor's to master's.
Yeah.
And, it's a disservice to them.
It's a disservice to everybody.
And it's a disservice to our core, whatever. Right. And so, we had a lot of arguments, because I'm like, you have no room to talk. You have nothing. You have nothing in your bag of tricks. It's like Felix the cat, so it's like, I just think that you need a high GPA. You need at least a 3.0 to get out of your bachelor's to get into your master's, but they don't require any bedside experience to get your master's, which you're supposed to be in leadership. So how can you lead if you haven't even been led?
Correct. Yeah, you don't have that experience.
Yeah.
So you started out in the Army and then transitioned into the Navy. So why did you go into the Army and then switch over to the Navy?
Well, you don't want to know the truth. We're on the air, but I actually went to the MEPS to join the Army, right? Because it made sense. I knew the lingo. I still even had my uniforms, And,
right. Culturally, you know what to expect. Yeah.
Right. So I'm like, so I get there, and literally, I would say in 6 months, I was there 5 times, and I could never get processed. Every single time I went, there was a problem with MEPS, with the station, And so I'm like, I don't get it, because I'm taking off work. I was still working, and you're getting paid to screw me around. Me and my recruiter were going down there a couple of hours round trip, and couldn't get my physical. So after literally there was some type of physical mess up, and before I left the MEPS, I'm like, okay, now look, I'm giving you one final try, right? One, because you have to put a top, So I said, I had broke my ankle. But anyway, I'm like, do you want an x-ray of my ankle? This was years earlier, but do you want an x-ray of what's in there, what's left? And they're like, no, are you sure? Okay. So a couple of weeks later, my recruiter comes by and says, I need to take a photo of you with your hat on or whatever. I'm like, okay. And comes over. He goes, oh, by the way. I'm like, what? And he was like, well, we need an x-ray.
I just asked that.
And I was like, not only no, but hell no. So I figured after so many months, if you couldn't get me in and you were just this inept, I did not want to be in the nurse corps. So that's just how I felt, you know. So when I checked into the maps, every time I checked in, I saw a Navy corpsman. And so I would leave with my little packet, my little name and everything already. And I would traipse on off to the Army side. And they'd be like, I didn't know you were coming. Oh, God. And after so many times, I'm like, it's not in crayon. I don't get it. So I literally called a Navy recruiter that day, because I knew I was never going to get in. Right. So I was like, I called the Navy recruiter and I said, listen, I've been to the maps. Here's my maps. I'm under the Army. They have everything. I finally had my physical. They have my medical record. They have everything. I think I want to join the Navy. And they're like, they didn't have to do anything, right? Just go get the paper. So the funny thing was, I had to write a note, and I think I had it faxed that says, I, Kathryn Wilgus, give the Navy permission to get my stuff from the Army side, right? And then one day I was in the operating room and I got a phone call at the front desk because they knew where I worked. And I don't think I had a cell phone on at that time, right? And so they're like, you have a phone call? And I'm like, okay. And I took it, and the Navy recruiter says, all right, I got you in. I need you to sign today. It was September 30th. I needed to be in before October 1.
Yeah, because he needed to meet his quota.
Right. And I said, well, I'm at work, so I don't know what to tell you. And he goes, where are you? So he came, and I get a call into the room, into the operating room. And they like, there's some military person here for you. And I'm like, oh, can I get a break? And so I go out in my scrubs and my cap, and there's my Navy guy, and we do the oath. I sign the paper. We do a Polaroid, dink. And
that was it.
Yeah.
You were in.
So I go back into the room. You know, nursing is like wildfire, right? Just a spark, and it poof. By the time I got back to the room, they're like, what's going on? Who was that? And I was just like, it's the Navy. Well, what did he want? I said, oh, nothing. I just joined the Navy. So, and then I got to tell you, you know how life's 360.
Yeah.
I was in Afghanistan, and I was getting ready to leave one tour. I was going back to back. So I did the North in Mazar-e Sharif, and then I petitioned the U.S. Navy, BUMED, whatever, since I was there, to put me someplace else where I could take care of our own troops, because I was embedded with the Afghan National Army nurses. And so I had been sending all my info to them and trying to get to stay. And then near the end, I get an email from somebody in Bagram, and they said, ma'am, I enlisted a Lieutenant JG by the name of Wilgus. Is this you? And I'm like, my recruiter was working on my end of tour award in Bagram. So that was weird. So I got to catch up with him, and I said, listen, because I was an advisor, I sometimes had to leave my post, my camp, and go to Bagram, long story, in Kandahar. And so he was at Kandahar by the time. And so I flew to Kandahar, and I got to see my recruiter in Kandahar.
Wow.
We're still friends today on his Facebook. He's now since retired, but he was a chief at first when I met him, I think. And then he became a warrant, and then he became an officer.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
it is a big Navy, but it's a small Navy.
Exactly. Don't you always like when people say, oh, like when I was in Kandahar, oh, did you know? I doubt it. If I knew anybody, you don't want to meet me. You don't want to meet me because you're on a table. You don't want to meet me. So I doubt it. Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. And then when we come back, we're going to talk more about the Navy and nursing and homeless female veterans to boot.
Great.
And now for the most famous words in motorsports. Driver Let's push it. Pushing that red line, right up and cut until the inside stands, rushing by with a roar and a blink of an eye. Ain't gonna take it slow, got 500 miles to go, living this life one lap at a time. Pushing the red line, yeah, I'm pushing the red line.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
And we are back from the break talking to Lieutenant Commander retired Kathryn Wilgus. And before the break, we were talking about her time in the Army and her time in the Navy. So what was some of the lessons that you learned in your time in service that you still carry with you today, even though that you're out and retired? And I'm jealous.
Obviously, I think it's going to be service, I think you serve others, especially as a nurse. And then the Navy, you serve your country. And so for me, even though, I'm wearing a shirt that's not really a uniform, it's just an identifier, but it's service. So I think that's the most amazing thing. I feel there's a lot of veterans that are retired, and even though they may not have liked their duty, there's a lot more that are still serving in the community one way or another, so I would say service.
Is there a specific moment or story that that you can recall that really kind of like, this was like the pinnacle of my career, or my military career? This was. Yes.
This might get me teary eyed, but when I joined the Navy as a nurse, I grew up on MASH. It is the stereotypical MASH dream, for me. I wanted to take care of our wounded. I knew I did, and I'd already been an OR nurse and civilian. And so my goal was to somehow get to a place that I could help our wounded, right? So I remember early on as a JG, I went to a board to be like the prepper or whatever, to be like the gopher for all the people on the board. And there was obviously a general there, or an admiral. And they were like, they wanted a meeting with all the JOs. And so we went, obviously. And, he basically gave me my whole career mindset in a sentence. He said, look, it's up to you. Make no mistake about it. It's your career. If you want to do something, then you got to do it. Don't expect somebody else to shape your career. And wow, I mean, that meant a lot to me, even though probably I was scared. But when I went to Germany to go work in Landstuhl, I begged, borrowed, and pleaded to get that duty, And guess who was there? Guess who showed up? It was that admiral.
I was going to say the admiral.
And it was mandatory for the Navy to go, right? But for us, it's really hard in the operating room because you just can't stop surgery, So, and most of the Navy was the operating room. We were filling majority of the OR positions, not the Army, at Landstuhl. So anyway, but when I was there, I made a wooden nickel, and I still have that wooden nickel. I made wooden nickels to give to my patients. And obviously some people thought it was funny, but I just wanted to say thank you for your service, and that I took care of you, and it was an honor. And it had the Navy Nurse Corps symbol. And so we had the all hands, and I remember dearly my commander at the time, my OIC, we're still friends. And after the all hands, I said, I'm going to go up and give the Admiral my wooden nickel. And she said, Wilgus, don't you dare. And I'm like, I'm doing it. And because she didn't meet him, I met him. I was in a room with him. So I went up to him. Now, I know he didn't remember me, but boy, I walked up to the front and he had his 06 next to him, his sidekick.
Right.
And I waited my turn and I said, Admiral, his name was Debink. And I said, Debink. And I said, I just want you to know that you made a difference in my career. I am here today because of you. You may not remember me, but in this particular year, I was at X, Y, and Z, and you had a JO mandatory, and you told me these words, and I have lived by them to shape my career. And I said, I can't afford a real a real coin, but I made these wooden nickels, and I want to give you one. And thank you. And so he says, he had his trusty sidekick, which was an 06, right?
Right.
He went, how about I make you a deal? And I went, how about we trade? And he went, coin.
Nice.
My very first coin was from an Admiral.
That's awesome.
But that was like the beginning that shaped my career. But at the end, I got a little carried away because I got excited, I guess. But when I talked about MASH, so when I was in Afghanistan, obviously I took care of the most traumatic wounded from the flight line.
Right.
So that was my MASH, right?
Right.
So there was this one time that I didn't get OR, you're behind closed doors. You
Right.
don't ever get to see the light of day, and we're a secret society, right?
Right.
So I was working the evening shift, 7 p to 7 a. And anyway, so I had one patient and I put him in ICU afterwards, and I had another one. So I had to go because it was only me. And so, but in Kandahar, you always received your Purple Heart from the general of the base before you left. It didn't matter what branch. If there's any people from their unit, they all showed up. It didn't matter if you were awake or asleep or intubated. You were going to get that Purple Heart pinned on you.
Right.
And they were going to take photos, and then they were going to give you your Valor quilt, all these things. But they also had a book, and it was a book that would follow that soldier, whoever, from that moment on to his final place, right? So I've never seen a Purple Heart ceremony because I'm always going back to the room. So right. By the time I got back with the next one, they were just about to start the Purple Heart ceremony, and I didn't have another one. So I thought, I'm going to stay. So I stayed in the corner, and sure enough, I watched the whole thing. That's how I just told you everything that happens. But this book, the general says, if you like, you can sign the book and wish him well or whatever. So I'm like, okay. So I'm the nurse. I can do that, right? So I moseyed up, and I was the first person to sign this. And I basically said, I am Lieutenant. At the time, I was a lieutenant. I didn't make lieutenant commander yet. But I said, I'm Lieutenant Wilgus. I'm U.S. Navy. I said, first and foremost, thank you for your service. It was an honor taking care of you. And thank you for protecting me, because he was out further than me, right? So that's it. I sign it, leave. And then I come back home months later, and I'm at Norfolk and not really paying attention. And I'm not up on my Navy emails. I didn't really want them, Right. So when I finally checked my email, it was a few weeks late, and there was an email from like Bupers. I always say Big Navy. And they said, ma'am, we have a soldier by the name of First Sergeant Michael Trost, and he's looking for you. And they were talking about Afghanistan. I knew him because we don't get a lot of higher ranking. A first sergeant's higher ranking. So he was the book that I signed. And
Wow.
so the Navy said, ma'am, I want to thank you for your service in representing us, right? So I ended up reaching out to Michael Trost, and we were to meet. And so I went to Tennessee. I was a part of his retirement ceremony.
Wow.
And then some months later, and I was the only person Navy there. I stuck out like a sore thumb.
I'll say fish out of water.
Yeah. So, but when it came time, I saw the Navy flag ceremony when I was in Germany, the retirement ceremony. You know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got to be a lieutenant in the line, and that
That's
stuck
awesome.
with me. That stuck with me. So I said, when I retire, if I ever, God forbid, get that where, I'm going to do that. So I was Army. So I had E2, 3, 4, 5. And then I came in as an O2, 3, 4. So, and then at the end, they're like, you can choose somebody to give them your flag, to give your flag to you, right? Your family or whatever. And so I thought, you know what? I joined because of MASH. That was my dream. So I talked to Michael Trost and I said, hey, would you give me my flag? Because that he represents why I joined.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And so he came in, and he since then had, he was due to lose his leg. It wasn't staying, but he had lost his couple fingers. He was an advisor like me, but when he went to a meeting, it was an ambush, and so he was shot a couple of times. That's why I had him. But anyway, so that to have that, to watch that flag and hear Old Glory make that route all the way up, and then him receive that flag and give it to me, it was emotional for everybody because everybody knew we had shared that. And afterwards, I was at Little Creek Base in Virginia at their church, and the chaplain came up to me and says, I have never attended a more meaningful retirement ceremony. At the time, I had Fleet Marine, or the right off the post base. Anyway, I had my counselor be like a prospective speaker on PTSD and how to incorporate your loved ones back into your life,
Right.
And then I had my twin, who was at the time, she was the current Bagram base commander.
Wow.
And she flew in to be my overall guest speaker. And so when my sister became an officer, because she was also enlisted, I was her first salute because I was still a sergeant in the Army. And then when I retired, she was my last salute.
Wow. What an amazing story. Yeah. That flag line, when they're reading Old Glory and they are passing the flag from one rank to the next, like I can't even tell you the level of like honor, patriotism. Like it gets so hard to explain unless you're watching it. And one of the guys from my unit retired, and I was watching it, and I was like standing there, like I'm like, okay, hold it together, just don't. Like it's so hard to not feel the power of that moment.
Yeah. The worst thing about it is nobody videotaped it. So I only have it in my head.
Are there pictures at least?
I've reached out. I've never found a photo.
Oh my gosh.
It was like going to a wedding and not having a photographer. I mean, I had everything else covered for my ceremony. So I had a beautiful cake. Oh my God. On the side, I'm going to show you my cake because it was like the comfort. I had a, whatever that fondant. I had a fondant ship.
Wow.
And I had a little dinghy being carried off. That was my retirement. It was funny. Yeah. But yeah, you got to do that. You got to do that flag line.
No, I am. Like once I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, no, I definitely have to do this when I retire, hopefully 6 to 8 years from now.
Yeah. Get a video.
We'll have somebody specially dedicated to just video on that moment. But it really is powerful and impactful, I have to say. I think that we should play it like at random times, like during like sporting events, we should play it so that people can feel the power of that moment and maybe some semblance of patriotism will come back into some of the people in this country, because I feel like it's lost.
I think Old Glory, in addition to the MIA ceremony, where they do the table ceremony, I think some people should option to do that for that same purpose, to hear the history as it has gone forward. And somehow that would be neat. And you know what? I'm going to see if we can do that for this year's gala. I'm going to work on that. Maybe you can come. It's October 4th, so try to save it this year.
It should not be a drill weekend. We'll see.
October 4th. So
okay, I'm gonna put that in my calendar right now.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna go ahead and take a break, and after that, we're gonna talk about transitioning out of the military and some of the struggles that our veterans face, particularly our female veterans.
Cool.
It's the guts and it's the glory. 100 stripes, 100 stories. It's the Pledge of Allegiance on the 4th of July. It's them handwritten letters from home. It's them sleepless nights alone. It's his newborn baby he left with his wife. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down, here's a line. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes. Hey. From the fields of Indiana to the swamps of Louisiana, to the golden coast of California, Uncle Sam's the only family he's got. His purple heartbeat won't stop, and his 18th birthday was the day he was born. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down, here's the line. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, stand on the front line. Family is proud but torn, but if you knew him you would understand. He was raised on how to be brave, just to see the flag still wave, and then he came home with only one hand. 'Cause Mr. Red, White, and Blue, lay down here to lie. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes. Stand on these front lines. He'll pay the ultimate price. Lay down his life. Mr. Red, White, and Blue, for these stars and stripes. March in line, march in line. Hey. Hey.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
And we are back from the break. Joining us, Lieutenant Commander retired Kathryn Wilgus. So you served time in the Army, you served time in the Navy, you retired, so now you're working as a civilian. How was your transition out of the service?
I think that the hardest transition, because I suffered from PTSD in the combat role. I did not come back to my operating room nursing, and it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't just that. There was a lot of things that went to it, because like for us in the OR, doctors are like normally pampered, and I was just not gonna be able to do that. I was no longer going to be politically correct with them because, that's not the most important thing going on in an operating room, So I went into a phase where obviously I was just as lost because I'd only known nursing. I tried some support groups. The military, the VA kept saying, well, because I have a degree, I'm going to be easy to rehome, like, put me someplace else. And I was just like, it's not going to be nursing, And so I knew I needed a long break from that. So I did go to culinary school. So that was a good transition for me. But coming back home, because I was able to go to culinary school while I was still in getting some care while I was on like med hold, I guess. That was a blessing because I didn't have to deal with a lot of people. But the VA wasn't equipped, and I don't think still is equipped for our women veterans or any veteran who comes in with first responder. I wish we could say first responder syndrome.
Right.
Let's start that. Instead of PTSD, let's go with first responder syndrome. I like that because one of the group therapies I had, or, classes and all these things they try to put you through, they're like, we don't know how to help you. So, and then they just leave. So the transition wasn't good. They tried to put me in another box with all these other marbles, and, it could have been different color marbles, but, I was just like, I was a square marble, and so I just couldn't fit in those groups because even though they were all women and they had some issues, and it could have been PTSD, but it could have been MST, it could have been a lot of other things, but wasn't related to first responders. And so I don't think it's fair to try to group trauma collectively, because you and your specialty, most of my friends and family, I love them. But when I was over there and I try to call them and I want to talk it through, they're like, look, I love you. I think it's great what you're doing. I support you, but I can't hear it. And so how do they tell you, oh, you got to talk about it, but it's not the same talk. Nobody wants to hear what you need to talk through. And it's not,
people don't understand it. But it's hard because I think there's this misconception that, well, we weren't in combat. How do you have PTSD? Trauma is trauma. There's just varying degrees. And just because, you and I weren't in combat doesn't mean we can't have PTSD from the sounds of, like, we could hear the bombs and the shit going off behind us. And then we're taking care of those people that have been in the shit. So, it's around us. We're in it. And, I read a study recently, 30% of nurses have PTSD. It's more than law enforcement.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing about that. We look at what clarifies combat, right? We only say people in the desert or people that I call door knockers or whatever, like First Lieutenant Ashley White. She was combat and she still doesn't get the same respect. And she was there. But as I tried to explain to some civilians, like your weapon, green, amber, and red, right? So when I was in Afghanistan, I was red the whole time. That means I walked around with my weapon chambered. That fear and that reality of having to pull it was very real. Mm-hmm. I was there when Osama was caught. I was there and that was an uprising. I was there when some Baptist minister in the state of Florida burnt the Quran, and they went and in Mazar Sharif, where I was, they actually stormed like a NGO place and beheaded everybody in retaliation for that Florida minister who burnt the Quran. So the dynamics of fear, should just be the course. There's different levels. I get it. But your thing with PTSD, when you're wearing red the whole time, and you know that you're on a base that not only do they not want you there as an American, but you're a woman, there was a Lieutenant Cole, the mission before me, who was embedded with the Afghan on that fob. And for one reason or another, while they were outside our fob on the base of the Afghan National Army, there was 4 of them running for some reason. Anyway, the Afghan member who was in the military up in the tower shot and killed her right outside the fob ECP, and then shot at the nurse. She played dead. Shot at another guy. Another guy ran back to the ECP. It was like really close. And the guy who was running forward, he was wearing a vest. Long story. But when they realized that he was not being injured, they shot him in the head and killed him. So, the threat was real. So when they say you're not in combat, I want to tell them to F off.
Yeah, agree. Frustrating and hard.
Yep.
So once you came back, and so you have figured out how to transition and take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. How did you become involved with the plight of homeless female veterans? How did you find out about it, and how did you get involved in it?
So probably 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a women veterans meeting, and there I met Marie Bogdanoff with Villagers for Veterans. And she was there to sell tickets to the Women Veteran Gala. And I was the first time I ever heard anybody doing anything for women, and I was in awe of that, because she also is not a veteran. She doesn't even have it in her family. So I got to know her through there. And I did not go to that gala that year. But I supported her through baking and doing other events because she believes in, if she's going to have to pay money, she wants to pay a veteran first. So I did a lot of baking for her. But like the first couple of times I did, Sergeant Peck is the first military troop or anybody, I think, that's had bilateral arm transplants.
Wow.
And so she had him there for a book signing, and I brought desserts, and I said, no, this one's on me. That's my way of giving back. So I got to work with her, with Sergeant Pam Kelly, when she was completing the house for a quadriplegic who was injured on the way to Iraq. And I watched this lady, and I thought, if she could do this, that's incredible, right? Because she's retired. And she's handicapped, technically. She was struck with polio as a kid and walks with 2 walking sticks. And I thought to myself, what a hard driver, Right. And so she asked me at one point, because I was seeing her a lot, and she was changing her board, and she was getting ready to do the Women Veterans program. She hadn't had that. She'd had 3 other programs. She was getting ready to add her Women Veterans program. And she says, I see that, you've been an advocate for women veterans, and, would you like to be my vice president? And I thought, I'm rough around the corners, not really sweet, So, but, I talked it over, and so I ended up doing it. And through her, we have forged our path to try to help our women veterans, because she learned so much trying to help Sergeant Pam Kelly, and she always fell in the gap. And so Marie wanted to make a difference with the women who are falling in the gap. So that was the whole thing. And then we looked around to say, who are we going to name the house after? And Marie obviously knows some writers, and, she had other book signings. And so she had known this one who wrote Ashley's War, which is based on the life of First Lieutenant Ashley White, who was killed in Afghanistan with 2 special forces. There you go. And so we were able to get through to her mom. And her mom said that would be awesome. We sat with her mom. She came here for the groundbreaking. She's followed us every step of the way. And, it's been my honor to share that story of Ashley and to honor our women veterans who have given so much as well. Whether it's through their life, it's not the same number, obviously, because the disparity of our numbers, our service is not the same. I get it. But we still have lives lost on the battlefield, some that have never been recorded because we've been in every battle alongside our male counterparts since the U.S. has ever been involved in any conflict. So, but we haven't been given that recognition. So, for me, when I go and I watch and I see people men and women, who are completely silent listening to my numbers or to what I'm saying about what's going on with our females, they end with, I didn't know. And that's the whole point, is to raise awareness, because our women veterans have been neglected by the VA as well, but for so long. And one of the disarming or arming stats is this: even though we understand suicide is terrible, it's terrible. Okay. 22 a day. I get it. It's rising. But if you look at the VA stats, women suicide rates are on the rise. Men have plateaued. They have not gone up. They have not gone down. They're still there. But women have gradually rised. And that's because we have had no place to go. We don't have the right groups. Everything has been, it's not that we need it tailored for us. It's just we're different, And so it's sad. So trying to help our women veterans, I have social workers here who said about our criteria for our house. They're like, well, you have to allow druggies into your house because most women veterans are druggies. And I almost wanted to clock them. I wanted to clock them, And so, and the women veterans that we've helped so far, none of them have been druggies. Some have been on CBD and THC, but they're not addicts, So it's a misconception, because I think that most people don't see women disheveled hanging out on the street corner is the problem. Our women,
they hide.
Are hiding. They're either in a car, they're with their friends, they're with their children, they're with their dogs, they're someplace else. For me, one of my things is about paying it forward full circle is for a year when I came in between the Army, I didn't go home. I went and I was able to sleep on somebody's couch. I didn't have anything. They allowed me to go into their family, and they had 2 children. And I worked and I worked and I worked. I worked overtime. I worked, and I was able to get my first car, brand new car, and pay it off in that year. And so, that's what we're trying to do, is to give our women veterans a hand up, not a handout. Because I think a lot of women, if they do come forward, they're a little bit more intrinsic, if you will, about accepting, something, so,
yeah.
Right. So, we're trying to get the women veterans who are transitioning out of the military. We've worked with, the Army and Air Base in Tampa, MacDill. We've gone to NAS Jacksonville. We've gone to homeless stand downs by trying to get our message out. We've been on different platforms. We've worked with the Florida DAV. They've been to our house. We've worked with the Homeless Coalition of Orlando. They've been to our house. So, we're trying to rustle the trees. But, we've been recommended by word of mouth, by churches. So, we know we're making a difference. We know we're getting it out, but we know we can do so much more. It's just a matter of still being a constant reminder and in the forefront of helping our women veterans when you get one,
Yep.
So, yeah, here it is. New beginnings for women veterans. Exactly. So we have 2. One is Ashley's Cottage in Fruitland Park. That's currently open and accepting women. And the other one is Ashley's House, which we're still building from the ground up. Oh, there it is. So we're pretty proud of that. It's going to be 6 bedrooms, private. We've had our signing of our wall. We've had community come in and write notes before we put the drywall on. There's been a lot of support. That is the congressman's aid right there for our district. We have seen the love and support and buy-in for this. It's just a matter of still trying to raise money to complete the house. Villagers for Veterans, we have service dogs. We just gave away, since December, we've given away 4, which is huge.
That's awesome.
So we have support from the the auxiliary, state of Florida and vets. The president of auxiliary of the state of Florida and vets has chosen Ashley's house as her service project during her tour, her year of being president. So that was her in that photo in yellow. So they came to the house and they're raising money for us. So, I got to tell you, I'm humbled that in the community that I have been able to reach, we're not getting back talk. People aren't saying we don't need it. People are like circling around and saying, listen, they're looking for someplace new to help support in their church or their women's group. We have a couple of new women's group. We have the DAR, we have the GFWC, our local one here in Mount Dora, and the one in Leesburg. They've done this, the General Federation of Women's Club. They're celebrating their 106th year, and they're the reason why basically we've been allowed to vote for that refuge back then. So, these people have taken on us to raise money, and that's still awareness for our women veterans. I'm tired, don't get me wrong, but I feel it's taken, 2-3 years to finally get people to start knowing who we are in this area, because the Villagers for Veterans was born and raised in the Villages. And so I'm about 40 minutes away from the Villages in Mount Dora, but still Lake County. They're on one end, I'm on the other. So it's been a tale to bring us out here and then to the coast and everything to get our message out.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how bad the problem of female veteran homelessness is. They're the fastest rising group of homeless, faster than their male veteran counterparts, yep, and faster than their female civilian counterparts. And I just found out about this issue about 5 years myself. So, I'm in the military 9 years, and why am I at that point, hearing about it for the first time? Why have I been in this service for 9 years and I'm hearing about how bad the problem is of female homelessness amongst female veterans? Why aren't we talking about this more? So I really appreciate you coming on tonight and telling your story and getting this story out there. Where can people donate, or if they want to donate?
So you can go to villagersforveterans.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You can look around there and you can choose what program you want to support. It doesn't have to be our women. It could be our dogs. It could be our mobility and independence, or it could be our veterans in need, which are small financial grants to help them get through on tough times. So it's just the link, villagersforveterans.org. You can go on there and look around and maybe come to some of our events if you want, but donation is great. And just to close it off, we are in the process of getting an endowment. So we just had the meeting 2 days ago, and we have another entity, GFWC Mount Dora, who's doing our first ever pickleball tournament here May 4th. And all those funds are going to open up our endowment. So people can leave their money to us as well.
That's excellent. We love that. We love helping veterans, especially homeless female veterans. Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. So, Kathryn, to close out the show, what motivates and inspires you?
Making a difference. When I see veterans, male and female, and they've reached out to us and we can help them, it's something that it's not a matter of I'm better than you. It's a matter of I'm so glad that we are here to help them. So, and if it's rough, you don't want them to get to homelessness. And there's a lot of our veterans are waiting to the last minute when, we have somebody who had a $2,000 electrical bill. Unfortunately, we can't do that because we are not grant funded. We don't have those big funds. So, that's a little difficult, but then we work with other organizations, and that if we can give a third and they can give a third, then we can help them. So we were trying to reach them, but making a difference in saving a family from off the street or from no lights, or, having them get their service dog or mobility, having these quadriplegics who are getting track chairs, or our service members who have lost a limb get on a motorcycle again. It's our motto is this: changing lives one veteran at a time. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? Piece by piece. If everybody does one piece, we can end this. That's all we're asking. One a day. Let's try that.
I love it. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for coming on tonight and sharing your story of hope and inspiration and getting the word out there that we are bit by bit trying to chip away at the problem of female veteran homelessness. So thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, sister. Thank you, Dog Tag Diva.
You are very welcome. You can come back anytime. We'll have a female veteran roundtable and we'll get into all sorts of troubles.
Go Navy, beat Army.
Go Navy, beat Army. Thank you so much for the Dog Tag Diva. I'm here to remind you to greet each day with purpose, passion, and tenacity, and be kind to each other.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us, giving our veterans a voice. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us, giving our veterans a voice.